How's it going, guys? Awesome Mayo here. And today, what you're getting right here, right now, what you're about to go through, used to be an audiobook titled The Only Way for Real Estate Investors to Make $30,000 a Month on Autopilot Without Doing Anything. Even if you have no experience, terrible credit, with no money down, and without even leaving your house. So it used to be just an audiobook, then we updated it, we changed it around, and right now this is kind of a class or a short film too, because you can watch along and you get to see things like my pretty mug here. So there's a little bit of eye candy added, right? But this also has to do with a lot more than just real estate. The actual, the actual content itself, the idea of going out and starting from zero. It doesn't matter where you are, whether you're, an experienced veteran or you're starting completely from scratch. A lot of times, if you're starting something out new, I know the feeling. If you're starting out and you have no idea what you're doing, it can seem overwhelming. You don't know where to start. You don't know who to trust or who to listen to. Or even if you have some experience in real estate or in business, it's easy to let a little success fool you into thinking you know everything. And the idea of rethinking your approach, of changing your entire strategy or challenging a core premise, too often it's an order too tall. Sometimes it's easier to reject something external than to revise something internal. So whatever your case is, whether you have a job that you want to replace your income from, or maybe you want to get into real estate and start making real money, or maybe you're in real estate and you're sick of being just another I buy homes guy who's out of business until your next deal, or maybe you don't want to be in real estate at all. And that's, that this isn't about real estate investing. This is about business building, about income creation and social mobility. So the actual title is more like, this is the only way you will ever make $30,000 a month and a lot more without doing anything. How do you get money coming in where eventually it comes in automatically? And how do you do it with no money, no credit, no credit checks, no banks, no loans, all that stuff, no experience, and eventually without leaving your house? That's what this is about, really, just, income and social mobility in general, because this isn't just about real estate. This is if you in general want to get better at the skill of creating income and income dictation and creating that income ascension for yourself and for others, and creating that income in a way where it doesn't just come in automatically, but that income machine, once it's set up, it runs autonomously while you are totally subtracted from that situation. So let's say you're making 20 grand a month, you should be able to disappear, and when you come back 6 months or a year later, it doesn't just stay at 20 grand a month, but it's grown to maybe 25 or 30 grand a month. So the word autopilot's not really the right word. The real word that we want to use is autonomous, where we create characteristics of autonomy. The main difference is that autonomy involves a form of governing, of self-governing. It doesn't just run on cruise control or autopilot where it stays at 20 grand, but when you set it up right, it actually runs and governs and improves itself. There is self-awareness in the business and the businesses that I'm going to show you how to create. And it's a very, very unusual skill. It's a very unique skill. Very few people have it. And it relies on you understanding a few things that you introduce and you implement as soon as you get started, because everything you're going to do is completely different. And it starts from the very beginning, the way you build it. If you want to build something better, it starts with a better foundation. So today we're going to get into all that. And I really mean it when I use the word only, by the way, the only way you'll make that money. In order for you to make $10,000, $30,000, $50,000, $100,000 a month and more, and to build that income generator in such a way that you're not required to do anything, in order to do that, in order to build something like that, you absolutely must do what we're going to talk about today. You have to do it. There's no way around it. Every single person that makes money subtractively from a business, they have all done this. Nobody has avoided doing it. And by the time we're done here today, you'll know how to do it too. You're going to know how to start from zero and how to make 10 to 30 grand a month at least. And you're going to see several examples of students doing it from around the world. Our people are doing it again and again and again and again and again. So I really mean it when I say this is the only way that you'll ever make 30 grand a month without doing anything. You must take this step. If you want to do that, you're going to have to take this step. If you want your business to make you 30, 40, 50 grand a month, if you want that kind of income coming in regularly without you being forced to do anything, which is the definition of a business, by the way. So many people have forgotten that. The definition, if you have to do stuff, if you are forced to do stuff, then you don't have a business. If you want to be in a situation where you're not forced to do anything, then you must do what we're going to talk about today. And the crazy thing is it only takes a few minutes to do, and yet still almost nobody does it. What the heck? I know, it's crazy. That won't be you, right? Right. Because this is how you build an empire. This is how you start from zero and you build something special. If you want to start, how you say, stacking G's, this is how you do it. And it's so simple that any mother grabber out there can do this and get started within 38 seconds of finishing this class. How's that sound? Now, just so you know you're in the right place, here's exactly what we're going to go over. Here's just a taste of what you and I are about to cover and what we're going to go over today. People always ask me about making fast cash. Now, most of the time they don't have the discipline and desire to do it, but let's say that you do. When it comes to making fast cash in real estate, people will say that it's impossible. But I'm going to go over one of my favorite ways to make a bunch of money. If you want to make $5,000, $10,000, $30,000, $50,000 in the next few days, the next week, the next 2 weeks, we're going to go over one of the fastest ways to make money that I know of. You're going to hear about a brother and sister who made 10 grand in their first 4 days. In their first week, they had over $20,000 cash in their hands. And she did something so cool over Skype. While using Skype, she was using Skype, which is free by the way, and it took her 5 minutes, and she did something really cool, really badass, and because of that, they never had to leave the house to make that $20,000 in 1 week. Another student in California went out on the very first day that he and I connected, the very first day that he became a student. He went out and made $6,000 his first day. I love that stuff. Leaving your house and coming back with $6,000 on his first day. And other students have done this and made similar things happen. There was another student who made over $70,000 in less than a week. Over $10,000 a day starting on his first day. That's crazy. Over $10,000 a day in his first week. And he made so much money that his brother-in-law asked me to stop talking about him because he didn't believe that it could possibly be legal to make so much money so fast with something so simple. And the brother-in-law was as wrong as bestiality, by the way, but the fact is that it is an unbelievable way to make money. You guys are going to learn all about it. You're going to see exactly how it works and how you can get the exact same thing started today, right now, without spending any money. You don't even have to leave your house if you don't want to. Very cool stuff. But that's not all. We're going to get into a bunch of other stuff. Imagine, for example, having a high school student who answers phones. She's a receptionist. Imagine having her go out and find you houses to buy. Then she talks to the sellers. She starts the process that not only buys the house, but also sells the houses for you. This is all done without you ever talking to anybody. You never talk to a seller or a buyer. The houses are bought and sold, and you get a text from an attorney with how much money they have for you to come pick up or how much money they just wired into your account. Think about a process like that. If you were making 5 to 10 grand a month, that would be pretty weird, right? Wait until you see how much this student's making from this, and you'll see exactly how he's doing it, totally autonomously. You'll also see how a lawn care guy goes from making 4 grand a month working his anus off to making over 40 grand a month without ever touching a lawnmower, putting on his gloves, or even stepping foot on another lawn again. How does he go on vacation, come back, and because of what he did while he was on vacation, he makes 5 to 10 grand a month for years using nothing but the phone? You're going to learn all about it. Also, I'll tell you about a letter that a young lady sent out. She was sending it to a group of non-responsive people. These are people we were sending letters to and they were not responding to anything. No matter how many letters we sent, no matter what kind of letters she sent, nobody was replying. So she came up with an idea to do something to the envelope, something so hilarious, so unique, and so probably illegal. I don't know, but it is. Honestly, you really have to hear this. When she first told me about the idea, I was laughing for like 5 minutes straight. I still crack up every time I think about it. It's awesome. And the bottom line is, when she sent this out, when she did this thing to the envelope and sent it out to this dead list of people, we finally got some replies, and she pulled in over $17,000 in less than a week. You're going to find out exactly what she did. And how about this? How about an experiment? Do you want to know about an experiment that I did with some students where I had them set this machine up, this way that goes out and finds deals for you? And I said, and part of the rules was that when we set this experiment up was that they were not allowed to spend more than 5 hours. They were only allowed to spend 5 hours putting this machine in place. And then after that, they weren't allowed to touch it. They just had to let it run and bring them deals. That's it. 5 hours and that's it. And of this group of students, the worst performing student made over $100,000 over the next 12 months. Now keep in mind, it was 5 hours, and then after that, they were not allowed to touch it. They weren't allowed to do anything. They did nothing after the 5 hours. So what can you do in 5 hours that'll make you 100 grand over the next 12 months? You're going to find out all about the experiment, how you can set this all up in less than 5 hours and never touch it again. You'll see it all. Brilliant stuff. And there's a whole lot more. You know, people always ask me, Azam, how did you defeat the Nazis single-handedly? And I always say it wasn't just me. Mostly me, but I had help. We're going to talk about that and get more into that and see what it has to do with all this. Also, you're going to find out what happens when AZ goes to Ferguson MO. It was crazy. Wasn't pretty. We're going to talk about that too. And a whole lot more. When we are done here, you're going to know about all this stuff and a whole lot more. So let's get started, kids. Today's lesson is very simple, very powerful, and it's a real game changer. And it's a real game changer. So remember, before we get started, you can do this. I get these questions all the time. People say, oh, I don't know if I can do this, this, and that. Yes, you can do this. Don't be an LC about it. What will the LC do? We all know what they'll do. The same thing they always do. They foam at the mouth with excuses, and each excuse nurtured and watered daily with an explanation of why it's not their fault. It's a steady chorus of complaining, right? That is not to be you. If you're not hungry, get hungry. Now, as always, in order to understand this, today's lesson, or any lesson really, it always helps to start by learning the historicity, the genesis, the origin. So, today's lesson all starts with this. In the 1930s, the U.S. military was developing new aircraft for national security. To do this, they held a contest where different companies and organizations would bring their best projects forward, and all the airplanes would compete to see who did the best, and the winner would get a bunch of money from the government to build more of their winning airplanes. This contract would be huge and worth lots and lots of money, so these companies would fight hard to win. They'd get invited to bid, they would compete fiercely with each other, and they'd try to win these contracts. Now, at this time, there was a certain company that was in big financial trouble. They were barely getting by, and just about the only hope they had of surviving was to win this contract from the government. So they took a huge risk. They put all their chips on one hand, and they gambled all their their money into a single aircraft. They needed to win, because if they didn't win, they'd be out of business. So after brainstorming, they came up with their best idea, and then they spent every last penny to come up with this. Look at that beast. Immediately you notice not one, not two, not even three, but 4 giant engines. The size and speed of these things, this had never been done before, or even attempted before. It was nuts, and it was given the nickname the Flying Fortress. This thing was massive, and it was just impressive to look at. But remember, the real question was how well it would perform against its competitors. That was the real question, and that was answered pretty decisively. This thing was badass, and it was smoking everybody else. They were winning again and again and again, and everything was going according to plan. The government was impressed, the company was happy, and just when it seemed like the competition was over, something crazy happened. On the morning of October 30th, 1935, the day before Halloween, 2 test pilots took the Flying Fortress out for a test flight. One of those pilots was employer Peter Hill. He was a legendary test pilot. So he and the crew lined the plane up, they sped down the runway, and they took off. And then, right after they took off, things went to hell. Somehow the plane lost control and crashed. And both of the pilots, unfortunately, died. Now, the crazy part was that this pilot, Peter Hill, was not a nobody. His skill made him among the best pilots in the world. And this is important because it made the job of who to blame for the crash a lot easier, right? When a pilot who was as good as he was at his job, at what he did, someone who was that exceptionally trained, when he crashes, it's obvious where to place the blame. On the aircraft, right? So that's what happened. The aircraft was blamed, and the government scrapped the project, they dropped the airplane, it was completely disqualified, and the government was moving on. Now, the company that made the airplane was pretty much done, right? Remember, this was their last shot, so it was about to be game over. But because the company was a little resilient and a little desperate, they went back to the government and they reminded the government of how impressive the tests were on the aircraft before the crash. And the company was able to persuade an investigation into the cause of the fatal crash. Now, everybody knew what the result would be, right? The crash couldn't possibly be the fault of this very skilled pilot. It was a very basic test, and he knew what he was doing. So the results of the investigation seemed easy to predict. However, the investigation concluded something that was painful to admit. What they found was that the cause of the crash was something very simple, the equivalent of a switch being flipped the wrong way, and that the final result of the crash, the death of the pilots, was not the fault of the aircraft, but it was, in fact, as difficult as it was to admit, it was because of pilot error. And the mistake was a very basic mistake, which made it even more unbelievable. And so the one thing that everybody on both sides, on the side of the government and on the company, what nobody understood was how ordinary pilots could successfully operate the plane in previous tests, while these extraordinarily skilled pilots, specifically a pilot like Peter Hill, how could somebody like him have such a big problem? And that's an overall really important question. How can the ordinary perform better than the extraordinary, and vice versa? How do you get ordinarily skilled people to perform as well as the extraordinarily skilled people? And it brings up a larger, more interesting question, and we'll talk a lot more about that later. But for now, back to the investigation. So after the government realized the true source of the mistake, they found some loopholes, and they found a way to still work with this company and help them and get them to build another prototype of the Flying Fortress. So the company came back with an even better, stronger version of the airplane, but they also did something else. They did something so big, so important, that not only did they change the world of aviation, but the world in general. They did something so super crazy, so badass, and so simple, I can sum it up in one word, and I will. But first, let's look at the result of what they did. Think about this timeline of when the test happened, when the crash happened, the investigation, and then when they brought back when they got their second chance, they brought back a better airplane, but they did something else right at this time. There was another big secret change that they made. We'll come back to this later, and we'll talk about this in a second, but after they made this huge secret change, this project of theirs, this airplane, took off. Get it? Took off. So they continued to make improvements on it, and it would eventually become this guy. The Flying Fortress eventually became the legendary B-17 bomber. The B-17 became famous and an international icon in the fight against the Nazis. Not only did the bomber have a higher service ceiling, meaning the top altitude that it could still operate at, but it also got a reputation for its resilience and ability to endure large attacks and still continue to fly. These are some of the reasons that the B-17 dropped more bombs in World War II than any other US aircraft. So think about this. It could fly higher, take more damage, and deliver more attacks. This was instrumental in defeating the Nazis. In fact, the military says to this day that it was because of the bomber more than any other single weapon. It was the bomber that allowed for victory over Germany. It was a monumental achievement, and it saved this company, the company that was in trouble. And the company, by the way, was started in the 1910s by this guy, an expert woodsmith who, after buying an early airplane referred to as a flying birdcage and crashing it, decided that instead of waiting months for a replacement, he would use his lumber and woodworking skills skills to build his own. That's what he did. He built his own airplane, and it went so well that he built a business around doing that. His name was William Boeing, and today his company Boeing is worth about $100 billion. They have over 150,000 employees. And even though they're known for airplanes, there's something much more important that they did. They created something that was more important than any airplane that they ever built, even the bomber. Going back to our timeline here, remember that secret thing that they did when they came back with the B-17 after the test crash? Well, that other thing that they did was more important than the actual bomber itself, because they created an environment where ordinary pilots could reach extraordinary goals. Remember that big question after the crash that killed the 2 military pilots was how could they create a more consistent performance? That was the big challenge, and what Boeing came up with changed everything. And this is the whole reason you and I are talking about it today. The bomber would be useless unless there was a way to ensure that it could be skillfully controlled by people who were not masters of the sky. What Boeing came up with was a secret way to make sure that people who are not masterfully skilled can still perform as well as people who are masterfully skilled. This is how average people can perform with above average results. Now think about this for a second. If you had a way to make the ordinary do the extraordinary, isn't that something that would be useful to your business and useful to your role as a leader, right? That's what Boeing came up with. It was after the crash. It was after the crash they got this second chance to work with the government. They improved the B-17's design and strength, but that wasn't enough. The real difference is in this secret thing that they came up with to even the playing field, to help make sure that there wasn't another fatal accident and that pilots with different levels of experience, skill, and education could all perform with consistent and predictable results. This thing that they came up with is a real game changer. It's a huge secret to getting rich. It's what broke people pretty much never do. Nearly every business and every hopeful business will end up as just another statistic. It's one of the biggest reasons. This is one of the biggest reasons why, if they would only just, if they would just copy this secret, yet most of them don't even know about it, and even the ones who are lucky enough to know about it still won't do it. They won't find an application for this gem of brilliance. They'll write it off through laziness or know-it-allness. But on top of that, to their defense, it is actually pretty easy to be underwhelmed when you learn about this secret because it's so simple. So what is it? What did Boeing do that saved themselves from going out of business? How did they turn an embarrassing fatal failure into a monopolizing of airborne warfare? What led to the effective use of the B-17, the spread of its influence, and ultimately the fall of the Nazis? It can all be traced back to this one thing that they did. What Boeing came up with was, this is my drum roll, the high quality, high production value drums, only the best for you guys. What they came up with was a checklist. And that's the secret. Specifically, in the case of Boeing, it was called a pre-flight checklist. And this is basically how the pre-flight checklist was invented. They wanted to avoid another disaster, and that is how the B-17 became so widely and successfully used. And this same process of using a pre-flight checklist or a safety checklist was later used to make all airplane travel safer. It saved countless lives, and this same process of using a checklist to create consistent performance and predictable results and, as a safety measure, this has been used with everything from Secret Service protection of U.S. presidents to car manufacturing, record producing, basically anything that you'll ever think of. And this is really how entire industries are revolutionized. The entire medical and healthcare industry relies on checklists to do heart surgeries, transplants, blood drives, and even for fighting diseases like AIDS, SARS, Ebola. The checklist is the seed of uniform execution. Now here's what this means to your business and to making money, whether you're in real estate or whatever. If you ever want to build a real business, then you must create checklists. In fact, when we talk about empire building, there are three main components to creating policies and policizing your business. We have flowcharts, checklists, and scripts. Now for right now, we're just talking about checklists, but just because I'm glossing over these three things and I'm not really focusing on the other two, don't let that fool you. When you understand this, when you understand all of them, it really changes everything. But for right now, our focus is just on the checklist and how it applies to everything. You want to harness this power. When a milkshake maker salesman bought one of his clients' restaurants, he saw enormous potential, but only if he was able to create a consistent product. He realized that the food didn't have to be very good as long as it was predictable, and that's what he focused on, predictability. He built checklist after checklist after checklist, and that's how Ray Kroc built McDonald's. Now, don't make the mistake of thinking you're too small or too big or too smart or whatever. Don't start thinking you're too cool for school. No matter where you are right now, you can apply this checklist process, and if you already are like a good student using it, then you can always get better. Either way, this is pretty badass. And we're about to go over a few examples so you can see just how much of a difference this can make. Now, as I go through these examples, you're going to see exactly how to start, build, buy, sell, and create a business starting today with no money, no experience, all that stuff. But remember, every single example here are all students following a simple algorithm. An algorithm, remember, is just another fancy word for a formula, a process. We love algorithms. Everything we do is based on algorithms. So to do this stuff, to start creating checklists, is a very simple 3-step algorithm. So, and again, we're going to see this algorithm at work again and again and again, iteration after iteration after iteration. That's what creates a masterpiece. So step 1, we idealize. You take a step back from your business and you look at everything you have going on, and we answer one simple question. What part of my business is running exactly like I want every other part to run? And this works even if you've just started, by the way. Just think about what is working exactly the way you want it to right now. Now, usually the answer will be nothing. Nothing's running perfectly or even close. There's likely not something that's running ideally, but that's okay, because in that case, we pick any item of top importance and we focus on it until we having it running exactly the way we want. We do it artistically with emotion supporting each action, or we get it done in that fashion, but it's almost always better, especially if you're starting out, to do it yourself artistically. That's step 1, idealize. Step 2, we checklist exactly what needs to be done to recreate that desired performance level. And then step 3, we subtract ourselves from getting it done. In other words, you get it done by somebody or something else. Remember, to have a real business, it means that you don't have to do anything. You're not forced to do anything. So if we take everything that a business does, we can basically put it into 2 categories, either growth or servicing. So you're either growing to get more or maintaining what you already have, growth or service. Then within all those possible activities, you want to gradually subtract yourself from being in a position where you're required to do any of it. This is such a simple concept, but like almost nobody gets it. But again, you need to be totally subtracted. And when it comes to getting something done, to getting anything done in your business, if you want to get something done without you doing it, you basically only have 2 choices, either technology or people. Either somebody or something else is doing it. If something has to get done, you're not doing it. Those are your only 2 choices. Either somebody or something else, either people or technology. That's it. So when you step back and you look at it this way, this kind of simplicity, it should be encouraging, because it isn't that hard to take a series of actions of defined behaviors that create a predictable result. And that's really all a business is, just a pattern of activity that results in a transaction, and taking those and then slowly just putting them through this process. You want to chunk those actions into groups, write a checklist to define them, and then subtract yourself from getting them done. Very simple. So that's the process. Idealize, checklist, and subtract. Then you just repeat the process over and over again, and pretty soon your business runs on its own and you can move on to the next deal. So just keep that process in mind. Idealize, checklist, subtract. Keep that in mind as we go through these examples. Yeah? Okay. Because remember, when we have a solid checklist, we make it possible, just like Boeing did, for ordinary people to achieve extraordinary results predictably. And you can switch that, by the way, and see that without a checklist, even extraordinary people will find it difficult to achieve even ordinary results predictably. And the key words there are extraordinary results predictably. We need everything to be predictables, right? Okay, now Walt and Mason are with us right now, but let's just talk about Walt right now. We talked about him a little bit yesterday. He had a lawn care business, and he thought that he had maxed out how much he could grow his business because it took so much of his time. How could I possibly work with more clients? I don't have any time. And so many people are in this mode that they think they're limited by their time, and they're right unless and until they document what could and should be done by someone or something else. Remember, if something's going to get done, there's only 3 options. You do it, somebody else does it, or something else does it. Remember, people or technology? So if you want to subtract yourself from your business, the only thing that will solve that puzzle is ideal execution that is documented with a checklist in order to properly explain what needs to be done. So that's what he did. That's exactly what he did. He came up with an exact checklist. He spent 1 week going above and beyond with each of his clients. He did his absolute best job that he'd ever done. He idealized his performance, right? His best work, his best follow-up, his best referral generation. He always had the idea that nobody would ever do as good a job as he did, but in order to test that theory, he had to isolate exactly what it was that he was doing that made him so good, and why he was able to grow and maintain his business as long and as well as he'd done. So the first week, the first steps, that's all he did. Idealize, right? He ran things as close to perfectly as possible. Cleaned up the yards, he cleaned the garages, he left behind a nice smelling card, he left behind treats for the dogs and cats, he left a personal note for an upcoming birthday or holiday, he organized the shoes and tools, he'd do a sample cleaning or a garden cleanup for all the immediate neighbors and leave them a note that said it was a free trial, and if they wanted this done every week or every other week, they could get a special. You see what I'm saying? He went crazy and he executed perfectly, and the whole time he was putting everything down and working from a checklist. So that's the first step. Execute brilliantly, ideally, right? And then he did the second step where he created a checklist of exactly what it meant to perform artistically. And then for the last step, subtract, he made sure that whenever anyone joined his team, they had a new checklist to use. They never even saw the old checklist, so this was just how we do things, right? So everyone that came in didn't get lazy or didn't get used to a suboptimal level of performance. You were expected to perform like a badass from day one, right? And before long, ordinary folks were performing extraordinary extraordinarily, right? They were doing brilliantly because it was made very clear exactly what to do. He was able to make regular folks grow his business in ways that only he would have done and that he thought only he was capable of doing. They were doing the same as he was doing on his best days, and before long he improved his checklist and his best days became his normal days. Pretty soon what used to be his best days were now his worst days. And then he did something that our students will recognize from the MFM and the Renting Brilliance models. He started working with other lawn care companies and he helped them implement his business growing checklist, and he would get paid on the increase in business. Now it wasn't hard to make anytime he worked with a group to make $3,000 to $5,000 a month anytime he picked a lawn care company to work with, because he'd pick ones that were serious and were really hungry about getting the job done correctly. So it was pretty easy to make $3,000 to $5,000 a month from each company that he picked, and then it got more and more to a point where he could make an extra $5,000 to $10,000 a month if he picked the right lawn care companies to work with, if he screened them correctly. So now his question was, how does he find more and better lawn care companies? So he started going on vacations, and whenever he'd hit a new city or a new country, he'd do the same thing with local companies in that area. And that's how after about 6 months to a year, he spent zero time doing any lawn care jobs. And he was making over $41,000 a month from different companies that he was working with, all from lawn care companies in different cities and countries that he helped implement his checklist with. Now think about the safety that he had built in. If it all went away, if all those companies disappeared, or if they all decided to rip him off, it would make no difference. He would pay no never mind. He'd just move on and rebuild the entire empire, right? It was regenerative. He knew exactly how to build it from zero. That's what I'm talking about. You see what I'm saying? Okay, let's talk about another student example. Earlier I mentioned McDonald's, and how can I talk about McDonald's without talking about Mr. Rivers, Doc Rivers? He's been with us for years, and he was, I think he still is now, but I know he was at one time, the largest franchise owner of McDonald's in the entire Midwest of Americas. He was buying them up left and right. He's one of the most successful McDonald's franchise owners in the world. He gets paid to go around and talk to other owners of McDonald's restaurants and tell them how to run their stores. So right now he's big time, but I knew him way back when he was just small time, when he was knee high to a grasshopper. And I remember when he was first starting out and he only had a few stores. And actually he was so good at it, it was so obvious, and he was so good at it that the first time I entered that space, the buying the McDonald's and the Dunkin' Donuts and Subways, he was the one that first got us into it. But when we started out, he and I were doing real estate deals together, and from day one he told me that he was only doing this to finance buying more McDonald's stores. And the very first McDonald's store I was ever involved with was because of him. He was really good at it. He was really inspiring. And so as he was acquiring these stores, I once asked him what was the secret. How did he know whether or not he was going to buy a restaurant? How was he so good at it? How did he know if it was a good deal or not? And he told me something. He taught me something that I've always remembered. He said, Azam, anytime I'm thinking about buying a store, I go into as many different shifts as they have. The night shift, the morning shift, the afternoon shift. And this was at a time, by the way, when there were a lot less McDonald's that are 24 hours as they are now. So he said, I'll go in, I'll place an order, and I'll see if they ask me a certain question, if they say the magic words. Now already I bet you know what the magic words are that he's talking about. I bet you know what the question is. This is like the stereotypical cliche question that we associate with people working in fast food. Just think about it for a second and you'll get it. You got it, right? The question was, would you like fries with that? Now there's other variations like, would you like that supersize? And they don't even use the word supersize anymore after that Morgan Spurlock movie, Supersize Me, where the guy goes out and eats nothing but McDonald's for 30 days. And by the time he's done, you guys should watch it if you haven't. Supersize Me is the name of the movie. It's like a documentary. At the end of the 30 days of eating only McDonald's food, he ends up like disgustingly sick and crazy unhealthy and just like basically pregnant. So it was like really bad PR from McDonald's. They don't use the word supersize anymore, but you get the idea. If they don't ask the obvious upsell question, like, would you like fries with that? Do you want to add fries and a drink? Or a value meal is only $1.30 more. Stuff like that, common sense stuff that everybody knows, even if they've never worked in that industry. If they don't do that, if the workers there don't do that, here's what he found. That when people fail to ask that on one shift, that in almost every case, they will not ask that in all the different shifts that they work. So if they don't ask that on the night shift, they won't ask that on the other two shifts either, because that's just how these people are trained. And when that's the case, when the staff fails to ask this simple one-line question, he told me, he said, Azam, when people are not doing that, I know for sure that I can buy that McDonald's and grow it by at least 50% practically overnight. Now I heard that, and like an idiot, I thought, wow, is there really that much extra money in fries? And the answer is no, of course not. It's not about the fries. It's about the fact that the staff is failing so miserably at following the checklist, right? If they're doing such a terrible job that even the most obvious and basic part of their customer checklist, which is to ask questions like, would you like fries with that? If they aren't even doing that, then there are so many other items and so many other vital checklists that are being ignored that all he has to do is come in and dust off the already already existing checklists and one by one make sure that they start getting done. Remember, how you do anything is how you do everything. So if you're screwing up the order taking part, then you're screwing up just about everything else. On the other hand, when you start executing correctly in one area, then everybody starts executing correctly and improvements are seen in other areas across the board. And that alone will grow the value by at least 50% immediately. And that's a huge deal. Think about it this way. On one of the deals that he and Millie partnered on, they bought a restaurant for about $500,000. And just like he said, he trained the staff to follow the policies and checklists better, and immediately the value went up to $750,000. 50%, right? But here's the thing. He and Millie expected this, and so they only put about 50% down. So to buy that $500,000 restaurant, they put $250,000 down. And then in less than 1 year, they made all their money back. In less than 1 year, their cash on cash return was over 100% just in their first year. If they turned around and sold it, they would have made all their money back. If they had sold it, their cash on cash return would have been over 100% just in the first year. Now they didn't sell it, they've held on to it, but think about how much money that's meant in all these years after that. You see what I'm saying? That's the importance of a checklist. And there's no exaggeration here, by the way. There have been times where I will go to a McDonald's, I'll place an order, and if they don't say the right thing, I'll tell him, he'll go check it out, and sometimes he'll end up buying that place. Now sometimes he won't, but sometimes he will. And he'll make that huge decision to buy it based on something that seems so insignificant, on whether one silly part of their countless checklists, just on whether one part is being followed or not. It's that important. Now, by the way, since I've changed my life with my eating habits, you may be wondering, what the hell am I doing at a McDonald's? So let me just say that although I'm pretty strict on my diet, and ever since I went vegan, by the way, I've never slipped on the meat. I have not eaten any kind of meat in years now. And I don't know how I did it, but I did it. But when it comes to the sugar stuff, I have to say that I'm not perfect. Sometimes I'll go to McDonald's and I'll order 2 of their, giant supersized fries, and sometimes I'll order 3 apple pies, and sometimes, I know I shouldn't be saying this, but sometimes I'll just thug life it and order the fries and the pies together. I know it's terrible. It's called market research, though. That's how I justify it. And while we're talking about this, I have to tell you guys something, because some of you think that I am Mr. Discipline, and I get emails and calls and voicemails all the time from people thinking that I'm so perfect and they could never compete with me when it comes to the diet, that they could never lose the weight like I did because I'm just so much more disciplined than they are. So let me bring everybody back to reality and tell you, give you a real picture of my discipline and why I really mean it when I say that if I can drop the weight and change my diet and change my life, then any human being on earth can do it. This will help make that more clear. In Missouri, I spent a lot of time in Missouri. In Missouri, there's a McDonald's everywhere just like anywhere else in America, but there's also a chain of Krispy Kreme stores, the donut stores, and this is like the actual store where they make the donuts fresh every hour, and they have drive-thrus. So a lot of times there's a McDonald's right next to a Krispy Kreme, and the first time I saw it, I thought, wow, this is like, fate. So there have been times where I'll do a combination of the fries, the apple pies from McDonald's, and then I'll roll up across the street to the Krispy Kreme and get donuts. Fries, apple pies, and donuts. I know it sounds crazy, but it actually kind of works. And it's how I've developed this weird palate for donuts with my fries and apple pies, which explains the following. I was once leaving a McDonald's and I saw no Krispy Kreme in sight, but instead I saw this kind of cheap rundown place called the donut store or the cookie store or something with that kind of Missouri creativity. And I wasn't going to go there, but in front of the store were these 2 giant black guys with their shirts off and tattoos all over the place, and they were holding up a sign that said, this sign said, fuck Krispy Kreme. And there was an arrow pointing to this donut shop, which that may have actually been the name of the place. I don't know. And I saw the sign, I see these guys, I see this rundown place, and I thought, wow, this is crazy. I'm looking at the sign and I'm like, I've got to try this place, right? I have to go there. So I pull up, I order my health bars and salads, right? No, it was like 2 dozen donuts and a dozen cookies. And I think every order got like a free dime bag or something. It's not a family-friendly place. Now, as I'm getting my order, guess what happens? Bam! I got tear gassed. Tear gassed. Yes, the cops shot tear gas at me. Not just at me, at a whole bunch of people. Now, as you may have guessed, this happened to be in Ferguson, Missouri. This is when the cops were going completely nuts. They were tackling pregnant women. They were driving through the streets in these giant tanks. They were shooting cans of tear gas and rubber bullets at people standing in their own front yards. USA, USA. I've seen stuff like that happening outside of America, but I didn't believe that was happening here. Now, I'm saying I'm not bashing all law enforcement, not going there. I have family in law enforcement, and I've worked with law enforcement for years. But what was happening then and there with a few of those guys was just out of control. They were arresting journalists, shooting at cameramen. It was crazy pants. Now, as all this was happening, you guys got to picture this, and you've probably seen the pictures or you remember them, right? There's smoke and tear gas everywhere. People are running and screaming. Looters are breaking into stores. Cops are on megaphones. There's bullets and sirens and flash grenades going off everywhere. So everybody at the store that I was at was just running for cover. Now, just to give you an idea of the level of gluttony that I am capable of devolving to, while this was all happening, I looked up and I could see my boxes of donuts and cookies right there on the counter, just a few feet away from me. So I rolled down my window. I looked at a woman who was running by, who worked there, and I was like, hey, and I'm like coughing up. I'm like, hey, I'm like coughing up a lung. And she was running by, she stopped, her face, she was covering her face, she looked at me, and she's coughing and choking too, and she's like, what? And then I said, and you guys got to picture the scene, it's like total and complete chaos. I pointed to my boxes through the window, and I was like, my donuts and cookies are right there. Could you please just hand them to me? And oh man, the look that she gave me. She didn't say anything. You guys got to remember, like 10 or 15 people died that night. So people are, actually running for their lives. You can hear the gunshots and the police on the speakers. And it's just like, she didn't actually say anything. She didn't have to. The look she gave me, it was just priceless. And so we're standing there looking at each other, and I was like, yeah, you're right. We'll talk after the riots. And I roll my window up and I start to leave, but traffic was stop and go, so it's sitting there dead. And I look back in the store and I kept thinking about my donuts, and I could still see them. And I was looking at them, and it was, let me say this, let me be totally clear. I am absolutely not suggesting or endorsing looting of any kind. But the thought did cross my mind, is it really looting if I paid for it? You know what I mean? And then I was like, stop, what are you thinking? Are you seriously justifying looting just for donuts and cookies? What's wrong with you? And I kept going back and forth in my mind. But eventually the bottom line is, you'll be happy to know, although a lesser man would have succumbed, my moral compass is such, not that I have to tell you guys, but it is of such gravity that it outweighed my appetite for donuts. But how sad is it that it was even a question, right? This should give you an idea of just how unimpressive my discipline can be. If you think that I'm too disciplined, this is the whole reason I'm bringing this up. This is the whole reason I'm telling you guys this. If I can do it, anyone can do it. Think about me. If you think I'm too disciplined, you need to picture this. There I was in the middle of the madness of Ferguson, quietly eating my giant orders of fries and apple pies, and at the same time actually wondering if I should go purging for donuts and cookies. Believe me, brothers, sisters, if I can do it, then every one of you can do it too. That's my point. How do we start talking about this? I don't know. You keep changing the subject. It's your fault. All right, let's get back to the checklist and how this allows for massive execution and better execution. So we just talked about McDonald's. That's one example. Let's go over another example. Let's take a look at real estate. The first thing to remember is that most real estate investors are broke or out of business until their next closing. And I'm talking about the active ones. Forget the ones that never do a deal. The bottom line is that most investors, almost all investors, are either broke or right on the edge of being broke. They're myopically focused, and they've built what we call that house of cards on a crooked table. So if you're in real estate or you want to be, the first secret to avoiding becoming like them is to realize that the skill of making money in real estate and the skill of building a business that makes money in real estate are two completely different skill sets. So let's look at this lesson of a checklist and how it applies to real estate. So once you know what you're doing, you shouldn't have to buy or sell any real estate in order to make money. But let's look at the process of buying and selling real estate. Let's just focus on that. If we actually look at buying and selling a house for a profit, if we consider those two actions and then we break them down into two main categories, buying and selling, I want you to look at buying and selling as nothing more than just two different checklists. So first we'll look at the buying and then we'll look at the selling. Now when it comes to buying a house or getting a bunch of houses, there are at least 100 different ways that we teach and talk about and different checklists and policies to use, but right now we'll just talk about just one. So one source of houses is through what's known as probate. So probate is whenever somebody passes away, if they owned real estate, it can enter the probate process. Or if there's any surviving members who inherited property and they just want to get rid of it for cash, they just want to cash out, that's what we're talking about here. Now within this world of probate, there are probate attorneys, executors of wills. They handle deals like this. So let's say that you want to get in touch with some of these probate attorneys and you want to work with them. You can help them with their business and they can send you probate deals. So here's just one way to do that. You send out a letter about once every other week. There are a total of 5 different letters. These letters are handwritten and they basically say that you're looking for good probate attorneys to send business to and to work with. And they can email you back for you to get in touch with them. Now these 5 letters every other week are going to last for about 10 to 12 weeks. And then you repeat them. You repeat that process. You repeat that sequence of 5 letters every other week. So that's the first part of our checklist, 5 letters. Next we have 5 emails. So once they email you back, they automatically get a sequence of emails, an autoresponder. An autoresponder is basically a robot that sends out emails automatically at a predetermined sequence that you decided. So now they get an email once a week, for example, and then a little bit later, once every other week. Now there's a total of 5 emails. So that's second on our checklist. First we have 5 letters, then we have 5 emails. Now those emails, send them to the last part, which are 5 videos. Now these are cheap videos. They can be shot on a cell phone and uploaded to YouTube. These 5 videos are very basic, and each video kind of has their own checklist. So video 1 is, hi, how's it going? If you're an attorney that handles probate, here's how I might be able to help you. Another video is, here are 3 different ways, here are 3 different examples of how I might be able to help a probate attorney like yourself make a lot more money and how you can look like a hero to your clients. Another video is, here are some of what other people are saying, and you include testimonials, and you want to remember to go through our propaganda package training when it comes to this and getting this done, because if you've never done anything in business right now, I show you how to get and use powerful testimonials, even if you've never done anything in real estate or in business in general. And we put that into our propaganda package, and it really helps with compliance. So you get the idea. These videos are short and to the point, and they help you build a relationship and move the process forward. It helps to screen and qualify these people without you ever talking to them. So think of this simple checklist, this 5 letters, 5 emails, 5 videos, right? And remember our steps to badass policies and our badass execution of a checklist. How do you do that? First we idealize, then we checklist, then we subtract. And remember, subtraction comes from either robots or people, or both, right? And this is an example so far of technology, because once that list of attorneys is compiled and you put this process in place, you do nothing. It all happens automatically. The letters, the emails, the videos, and the letters can send people, by the way, to a website, a simple small website. So instead of having them send you an email, they can go to a page where there's that first video, that introduction video, and then there's a place for them to enter their name and email, and then they get the other videos and they get those emails. They get that sequence of those 5 emails. So that process, that cycle, is what people go through to get to know you and how you screen and qualify the people that you want to work with. It's totally subtractive and autonomous. It runs on its own. Now once this is up and running and making money and deals are closing, you can start introducing things like using FedEx with each letter and building your team so somebody like a transaction tech follows up with a phone call with a real simple one. Did you get my FedEx package? Anytime you send anything through FedEx, it gets opened immediately, even if it's ticking. So it's a great compliance move. And that same Todd or transaction tech on your team, they can search public records, like in newspapers when there's an estate sale. It's often required by law that it's advertised so that any creditors can come forward and state their claim. So each name can have an asset search done, and then you can use the inherited property list. There's a lot of different things you can add to this. But if we just look at those 3 things that we just talked about, it's a checklist, right? Public records, newspapers, inherited property list. You see what I'm saying? There are checklists within checklists. It's like this checklistception. And this takes not even a few hours a week, and anybody on your team can handle it, so that any and every deal that ever comes up, and more importantly, every single attorney and gatekeeper in your area is on lock, right? You get it locked down. You take over that city. But right now, let's just look at the gatekeepers. Let's not talk about the other parts where you go directly to the people who inherited the property, just the gatekeepers and the probate attorneys. And by the way, I'm not even mentioning the GXM, the Goodwill Experiments model, or the Gratitude Experiments model, where we create that viral volunteerism. So imagine, but just to give you an idea, imagine talking to an attorney or letting them know in the video, letter, email sequence. Imagine when you say something like, hi, I'm the director of a volunteer army. We pick local companies to volunteer for, and of the last 16 we picked, 15 of them made over $1 million in 1 week. And right now I'm looking for the best probate attorneys for my volunteer army to volunteer for. If you think you'd be the best, let me know why. You see what I'm saying? You see how that works? This is how you monopolize a market. It's how you destroy your competition, and how you totally run things when you hit an area. It's like you bring a two-pocalypse, yeah? Now, just take a second and think about the core items that we just went over there. The 5 letters, 5 emails, and 5 videos. The 555 as we call it. That allows for total subtraction, but the real question is, how long does it take to set that up? If you think about it for 10 seconds, you'll realize that you can set all of that up and build that machine in less than 5 hours. Remember that experiment I told you about earlier? I did a challenge with a group of students, and part of that challenge was that they were not allowed to spend more than 5 hours setting this up, and after it was set up, they had to be everything had to be totally hands off. They weren't allowed to talk to anybody or email anybody or follow up at all. It had to run totally on its own. After the 5 hours of them setting it up, they weren't allowed to do anything. Now, what do you think the results were? I kind of mentioned this earlier, but I'll go into more detail in a second. You definitely want to check it out and see what happened. But the point is is that this is just, we see the power in just one way of using a checklist that allows for deals to come to you without you ever talking to anybody or lifting a finger, without you even leaving your house once this thing is set up. You see what I'm saying? It's completely autonomous. And what does it all come down to? A checklist, bruv, a checklist, right? So that was an example of the buying, right? How do you get deals coming to you without doing anything with the, getting a checklisted and subtracted? So that's an example of the buying side. Now let's take a look at what happens when you have a house, when you have a property, when you have a house and you've got a deal. Let's look at a checklist at how to move those houses at light speed. How do we get a checklist and get it subtractive? And again, just one more time with the 555, this can be used as many of the good students out there are recognizing this has been used. This is the same thing we use again and again with several people outside of the probate industry. But in this case, most people, the problem with most people is they get discouraged and they quit. But that's all baked into this, right? Once this is set up, we get it going. Repetition, accountability, discipline, we get it going. We tweak it and improve it as we go. And we make sure that when we set things up, they run permanently and subtractively. So think about if you had this set up, all you're doing is you start out with just a few attorneys and then you just add more and more and more and you grow it. And eventually every single attorney, every single gatekeeper in an area is locked down. You make sure that you're the last one standing. It's how you outmarket and outdo everybody else. So that's on the buying side. That's one example of using a checklist to get the buying part of the, to get deals coming to you. So now let's go on to the checklist for selling. So this is the checklist for selling those houses, for moving those deals. Now again, there's countless ones I can go through here, but just to keep it simple, let's look at one basic one, signs. You spend any time getting into real estate investing, you're going to hear about signs, but I promise you, you've never heard of signs the way that we do them. Okay, let's use, when we talk about signs and policies, we use sites like traffic.com to find high traffic dense areas in the appropriate income areas for your target house. We also want to have directionals up. We want to use ugly signs with handwriting on them with words like must sell or you can move in today, no qual. And then we can change the verbiage if we get too many calls or if we get too many low quality calls. But the goal at first is to get as many calls as possible and then you calibrate later based on the results. The point is that anybody, by going through this checklist and doing it correctly, anybody can take a house and do the basic research on that house and on the surrounding areas to find out where to put the signs, how many to put up, and how often. It's simple because remember, it's all based on an algorithm. It's a policized checklist, which means that just like Boeing earlier, we can take ordinary people and even less than ordinary skilled people and make them perform with extraordinary results. Makes sense, right? So on top of that, let's look at a real estate agent or realtor and having them handle the signs to get the calls to sell the house. Second, they will handle the showings of that house when there is a qualified buyer with money and or credit. They'll get that buyer into the property to see it, and it'll usually involve the agent putting a lockbox on the property. And then at that showing, one of two things will happen. Either the buyer goes to close or the buyer does not, right? It's really, really simple. If they want to close, then the agent immediately takes them to your attorney's office and the closing begins. So the paperwork, the basic title work, whatever needs to be done, it's all done and the buyer writes their check and the closing happens right then and there. It can happen the same day because the seller does not have to be there. They can come in later and sign the paperwork, or maybe they signed it beforehand. Either way, the deal is done. So think about that. The agent's handling the signs, they handle the showings, and they handle the closing. They take the buyer there between the agent and the attorney, they handle everything, and then you get a call or a text or an alert that you have, $7,000 waiting for you. You see how that works? Now let's look at that basic checklist for the agent. Signs, showings, closings. Really simple, right? And with this deal, if it's a terms deal, like with a lease option buyer or somebody buying on terms, or if it's a standard buyer with a traditional loan, it still works the exact same way. It just takes a little bit more time if it's a standard purchase because the lender has to get all their verifications and stuff. But it's the same way. The closing is handled by the agent. And when the smoke settles, you have a check waiting for you, or you have money transferred right into your account. Now let's look at the agent from their perspective. The agent can be paid a few different ways. They can get a part of the down payment. They can get a percentage of the sale. They can get paid monthly overtime. You can also just pay them $10 or $20 or $30 or whatever an hour, but you only pay them at closing. Either way, it costs you nothing out of pocket. So the agent gets the house and they know exactly what to do and how to move it. So even if they aren't the sharpest tool in the shed, they can make up for it with enthusiasm and desire just like anybody else. So even regular agents can perform like superheroes as long as you support them with the training and the recipe for success, the checklist and accountability. So that's an example of a buying and a selling checklist and how it can be all done subtractively. Now this is just the beginning, by the way, but let's just take a look at where we're at right now. Let's look at those probate attorney policies here, this checklist. Now remember that challenge, that experiment I told you about earlier? Here are the details on that. Here's what we did with about 5 or 6, maybe a total of 8 students. I think it was only about 5 or 6 total students that were doing this. Now I don't work with a lot of students, as you know, so I'd rather work with a few students and go really deep with them, and then we can eventually partner and build companies together. So I don't make money off students, I make it with students. In fact, just about everybody on our team, Millie, Zach, Sonny, Trisha, Sam, pretty much everybody started as a student. So in this experiment, I think we definitely had at least 5 students who were involved with the challenge. And the challenge was real simple. This was a real simple experiment. They just put this in place, the 555 with probate attorneys, 5 letters, 5 emails, and 5 videos. And after it was set up, they had 5 hours to do it. And after it was up and running, they weren't allowed to do anything to mess with it. The only thing they were allowed to do was take the deals that came in as a result of it. That was it. So it really was a set it and forget it and just sit back and wait for deals to come in. That was the situation. And now that you know how it works, it's easy to see how subtractive it is, right? The whole deal comes together pretty subtractively. So the question is, how much did they make, or what were the results of this experiment? Well, as I said, the worst performing student of that bunch was Rodney Stahl. And over the 12 months after that experiment, after that 5 hours, over the next 12 months, he made over $108,000. That wasn't the total amount of money that he made. This was just the deals that came from setting up this checklist once and never touching it again. Think about that, getting it going once and then never touching it again. That's 8 to 10 grand a month for the next year, at least the next year, just from deals that came from this. Now, that is a bit misleading because each of these guys, they were doing all sorts of other stuff. So if you set this up and then once deals come in, you don't do anything or you don't set up policies to handle them, like a selling policy or a selling checklist like I talk about, then nothing's going to happen. But that brings up an interesting point, because remember, you can have a single person on your team handle the deals when they come in. So you can do the entire model without ever talking to anybody or doing anything once it's in place. Here's what I mean. Once you get the process of coming up with a checklist and getting the stuff on that checklist done, this idea of, this process of employing and allocating resources so that your policies and your checklist get executed, once you get that dialogue down, there is nothing else that you ever need to learn how to do. If you're good enough at talking people into doing stuff, you never have to do anything else. Here's a good example. Here's what I mean. Another one of the students in that group that I told you about, the worst performing student, Rod. But there was another student in that group, Raul. Now I know what you're thinking. Raul sounds like a foreigner, and you know how I feel about them, but we'll give him a free pass. Now Raul, and we've talked about him before, sometimes we call him Julia, and he did about $150,000 during the same time from that same checklist of the 555 with probate attorneys, about 150 grand in that same period of time, just from that. But he wanted to turn it up, so he did something that Millie's been doing for a while. Because remember earlier when I said that you could pay your agents, let's say $25 an hour, and then you could pay them when the deal closes? Well, if you look at it, the agent doesn't actually, if you look at the stuff they have to do, it's not that hard to do. And it's especially true when you're providing the checklist of brilliance, which allows anybody to perform with Terminator precision, right? So if you look at these 3 things that you have your agent doing, signs, showings, closings, that can be done for a lot less than $25 an hour. In fact, the agent could do a little arbitrage and pay somebody $10 an hour to do that stuff, and they could pocket $15 an hour off of work that they're never doing. You see what I'm saying? And we know that. And we even create this with that in mind. If you build a business correctly, then it allows other people on your team to build a business within yours. So an agent can have anybody put out the signs, and then they can have their assistant do the showings and even do the paperwork at closing, because it'll be the same paperwork, the same deal, just different numbers and different people. So if all we're doing is changing the numbers and people, anybody can do it. So not only can this be subtractive for you, but it can be subtractive for the agent as well. You see how quickly you can move yourself up and become a massive priority for the people you work with? Okay, so back to what Millie and Raul Venso were doing. And actually several other people have done this. Now, I want to stop for a second. We talked about the probate attorneys getting the deals from probate attorneys. I'm going to stop that for a second, and we'll come back to that in a second. Here's what he did when he went back to one of his agents, and he tested something pretty cool. So just about any real estate brokerage has a receptionist, and often those receptionists are the ones who schedule showings. And so Raul had the receptionist use a checklist to get on sites like Zillow every single day, and she would mail a handwritten letter to every single new listing. Like the rental listings and new sale listings. And there within those mailings is another sequence of 5 letters that go out to those sellers. And there's so many pieces of software. One of them is Outlook. Outlook does this for free, where they will track the sequence of letters that you're sending. So basically all she had to do was log onto her computer, and it automatically gave her a notice. It gave an alert as soon as she logged on that told her which letters needed to be sent to who. So it tracks where people are in the sequence of 5 letters. So all you do, you're going to send out 10 copies of letter 4 and 15 copies of letter 3. So it tells you what letters need to be sent to who. And you can set up a feed so that it automatically updates you on any new listings, so you know who gets letter 1. And then every day it pulls up all the old letters that you sent, and it tells you where people are in the sequence and which ones you need to print out or handwrite. So basically all the receptionist did was log into her computer and follow the exact checklist that came up for her. And she could do this at work during downtime and make an extra $10 an hour doing this, all during downtime. Now those letters that were sent to sellers, sellers had a voicemail that the sellers could call. And then the same receptionist had a very basic script to qualify those people and categorize them into different groups. So the receptionist would, during her downtime at work, or maybe before or after work, she would return the seller calls and she would screen them. You see how this works so far, right? Very basic, very easy. All she's doing is sending out letters, then checking the voicemail and getting back to the sellers and putting them in the right category. Now, for the appropriate deals, she would send them over to the agent in that office. And then what did the agent do? Use the checklist, right? The signs, showings, and closings. The agent didn't do any of that. The agent had an assistant who did the signs and set up the showings for the buyers, and they went to the closing, just like I explained. You see how this works, right? The assistant and the receptionist are getting, let's say, $10 an hour to do the basic work, but you'd be paying the agent, and you're paying him, let's say, $25 or $30 an hour, and the agent is doing nothing, and they're making an extra $15 an hour off of the work that's being done. All they're doing is making sure the wheels keep turning, just making sure the trains run on time. Now, I hope this makes sense, that the power of a checklist becomes even more clear, that getting a checklist and then making sure that it gets executed. Hopefully this is all becoming, really crystal clear, because that's all Raul did. And put yourself in his shoes. Think about this. You have a receptionist and an agent's assistant who are performing surgically, right? You've made it clear exactly what needs to be done, and because you are completely, totally subtracted from the situation, you are seeing the exact results. The deals are found, they're screened, and even closed without you lifting a finger. And would you need any of these people, by the way? Are you dependent on them? Absolutely not. You can switch them out at will. You can change the players anytime you want because you have the checklist. This is why, understand that you're always looking for performers. Everywhere you go, you're always looking for the artist. You're always looking for people to build your team with. You're always ready to help somebody become part of your method of execution. Now, let's look at the interesting part, what everyone wants to know, the numbers from this, right? Remember, this was during the same time. I said we'd come back to the probate deals. This is not the probate at all, right? This is Raul working just with that same agent, but saying, how about we add another stream of income here? So during this same period, we tracked how much money was made just from these deals. Just from these deals through Zillow, where she was the receptionist, who was a high schooler, is screening these calls and then sending them to the agent. And it came out to about 1 to 2 to 3 deals every month. Standard, these are just, and I'm only counting the standard terms deals, like the lease option deals, the domestically financed deals. I'm not even including the listings that the agent got. And just from those deals, it came out to about $7,000 to $8,000 a month. I think the exact number that he had was about $90,000 to $92,000 over the next year, that same time period. And remember, this is totally autonomous. If you put this in place, what exactly would you be doing? Nothing, right? And how long would it take to set up? Hours, days? Even if it took you a whole week, after that week, it runs automatically. It runs autonomously. This is how you build a real business. Now, from the agent's point of view, think about this. The agent's having two different sets of deals. On one hand, we have the deals coming from the probate attorneys. I said we'd come back to that. Now we're going to talk about that. And he has the deals coming from this, what the receptionist is doing. But the deals that are coming from the probate, since the receptionist, they already understand how to screen deals, they were screening all these deals anyway. So that 150 grand roughly that Raul made during this time, it was coming from that same agent taking all those deals that came from the probate attorneys and doing the exact same thing, putting them in for term sales or standard buyer sales. So that's where that 150 grand came from. The point is that since Raul had his team in place, they were already screening those deals that were coming from the probate attorneys. He had no involvement with that whatsoever. That 150 grand over that next year came in without him doing anything with any of those deals. Now, when you add that 150 grand, now it was over 150 grand, but when you add that $90,000 to $92,000 that was coming from the receptionist, that comes out to about $250,000 for the year. And I don't know if that's exactly right, but I know that the bottom line is we tracked it per month. The experiment here made him a net of over 21 grand a month for 1 year, at least 1 year. 21 grand a month. And you see where all that money is coming from, right? It's basically having a series of checklists for selling, then a series of checklists, the 555 with the probate attorneys, and then these this checklist with the receptionist. That's it. Just having these 3 checklists running, 21 grand a month for a year without ever talking to a single seller, ever looking at a house, ever, looking for an inspection report or, negotiating a price or any of that. None of that was done. It was totally autonomous. And it's growing over time. Now they've actually been able to double it. But that's not the point. But first, I just want to make it clear how simple it was to get this checklist in place and how simple building a business can be when you look at it from this perspective. This all comes down to this simple checklist. You see what I'm saying? And I love this idea that, you have these deals coming in, right? You have the probate checklist in place with the attorney. So those deals are coming in. Then they're being handled by your attorney who's got his policies, his checklist that is, that's running. You're making money from that. It's running subtractively. And then you look at this process and you think, how could I add something else? If, the fact that the agent is using the checklist, they're using it appropriately, they're executing well, how do I add another source of deals to that, right? website, and then you just go in, tinker in a little bit, add these 5 letters to the Zillow, and boom, the whole thing nets 21 grand a month, totally autonomously. And by the way, even though he had no involvement, I do recommend having at least a conference call so you can improve and things like that. But the fact is that when you can go out and you can build oil wells like this that quickly and that easily, it really puts things in perspective. And again, this all comes down to a simple checklist and its execution. You know what I mean? This is why I've said it's so important. And we've had other job killer experiments where we have people go out and do experiments to see how quickly they can replace their income from their job. And one job killer experiment is just have, when you leave your house and you're on your way to work, put up 3 signs every day, 5 signs every day. A simple checklist, right? So 5 signs every single day, and then you follow up to make sure that you're tracking the best location. I could go on about that. I could tell you that if you did that, if you actually put up signs every day on your way to work or on the way home or whatever, if you actually did 3 signs a day or 5 signs a day, if you did that, then in 90 days you would quit your job because you'd be able to replace your income. And I can tell you that out of hundreds of people that have tried this, no one, never, not once has anyone stuck with it and not quit their job. And it's not because the signs are so profitable, it's because if you're disciplined and hungry enough to keep up with it and to keep that up for 90 days, then you're definitely going to follow up with the other supporting things that need to be done to make it happen. So just something as simple as putting out 3 signs a day or 5 signs a day, just a simple checklist like that, and then following up, and 90 days later you replace your income. Just something as simple as that can lead to somebody replacing their income from a job. And I've had people replace incomes of over 6 figures, and not just 100K, but over 250K a year they've been able to replace just by this simple checklist. Leave your house, put out 5 signs a day. It's about being artistic, getting obsessed, and looking forward to psychotic levels of work. If you look at a company like Microsoft or Apple or Coca-Cola, what is the real advantage they have over you if you're a one-man army? You might think it's money or name recognition, but if you look at it academically, just the economics of it, the only real benefit they would have over your company is specialization. They have so many different people who handle each minute aspect of their business. Where with you and with too many real estate investors or small business owners, if they were to draw out a diagram of the hierarchy of their organization, each circle would be you. It's you that handles the orders. It's you that handles customer service. It's you that handles shipping. It's you that handles inventory. It's you that handles bookkeeping. It's you that handles everything, right? That's why as soon as possible, you want to fill those roles with people who can get artistic, and you want them to be able to get rich if they push for it. So take the receptionist I mentioned earlier. In Raul's case, she was making $10 an hour, and a lot of times a real estate investor or somebody will brag about hiring a VA, a virtual assistant, something I never recommend doing, and they'll brag about how little they pay them. This is the exact opposite of what I want you to do. Part of building your empire is helping other people build an empire within yours. That's why you want to expand their role. Somebody should be able to come into your company and get rich just sending out letters or putting out signs, or at least be able to rise in the ranks so they can be put in charge of stuff like that. I remember not long ago, Sonny stood up and he had brought 2 of his people who were each making over 20 grand a month just putting out signs for him. And everybody was blown away, but he did the math and showed them how he was making over 6 figures a month. And the level of detail and obsession that they had when they were doing the signs and the way they were doing it for him, the way they were performing was unlike anything anybody had ever seen. That's what happens when you do this right. When you put obsession into building, into creating something, people will be obsessed about it. Take, for example, what we just talked about, the sending out of letters. Yes, you can hire somebody and they can just send them out and that's it. And if you hire a VA or you allow LCs or people with mediocre drive who are doing the bare minimum just to kill time and get paid, if you allow that into your ranks, then pretty soon that will be the normalized level of tenacity within your team. That will be how your team operates. If you want the crazies, the nuts, who will be with you for years and build company after company after company with you, then you need to treat them that way. And again, don't take advice from anyone who talks about building their team unless there are people on their team getting rich. So in Raul's case and Millie's case, and with everybody else, the way I recommend you set this up and the way that most people do is once things are up and running, although you don't have to do anything, you always want to have at least a conference call once a week, like I talked about, to keep your team on track. Basically, you go over 3 main things. Number 1, where are we? Number 2, what do you recommend we do to get where we want to be? And number 3, what is the checklist of things that should be done by the next time we talk? It's that simple. See, we even have a checklist for how we do our calls, right? Think about it this way. We have a close friend of ours and a student. I really want you to pay attention to this. We've talked about signs a lot, but just check this out. I talk a lot about signs, and you've probably heard a lot about signs, but I want you to hear what I'm about to tell you now. And think about how many people on the planet do signs as artistically as I'm about to describe. We have a close friend of ours and a student, Gary X, and he was a nut when he got started. He went crazy. He started building his team, and he got a young gal named Darcy. She was a hungry college student at the time. Now, most people will find a way to pay her pennies, right? Find a way to pay her the least amount of money and have her do some meaningless work. Basically, they expect next to nothing, and they will get it. Because remember, in general, people hate to disappoint, and it goes both ways. So when it came to something as simple as putting out signs, this This is a basic thing that everyone's heard of, or at least everyone's seen, right? And some people even bitch and complain that signs don't work in my area, or the sign Nazis are all on my nuts, or whatever, right? They constantly bitch and complain about this. Well, here is how an artist puts out signs. This is how a badass puts out signs. Darcy was on a local softball team, and she went to everybody on her team, and she got signs in every single person's yards. Now, when I say signs, I'm talking about the signs where you look for real estate buyers and sellers, right? So we're making it very simple right now. Still talking about real estate, although we can use signs for anything else, or I won't even get into that right now. I'm just talking about real estate investing. So with each sign in the yards of the people on her softball team, she tracked which ones were pulling the best and which ones were not. And then she went to the signs that were not doing as well, and she went to neighbors and high traffic locations nearby, and she found better and better pulling locations. Since these signs were all in yards, right, there's no chance that they're going to be taken down by anybody. She has total control over them. So imagine what happens when you have 20, 30, 40, 50 signs out there, and these are all high pulling signs that get calls every day. What would that do for your business? Maybe you don't understand how profitable one deal can be from one sign, so I'll explain that in a second. But just maybe you're not as clear on how profitable this can be, and I'll do the math in a second. But just from this one deal, just from the signs that came just from her softball team and the improvements that she made once she got them up in surrounding locations, just from this one deal, just from that alone, Gary and Darcy have made $20,000 to $25,000 a month, every month. And I don't mean that's been the total amount, 20 to 25 grand. Each of them have made 20 to 25 grand a month. Neither of them, neither Gary nor Darcy, has made less than $20,000 a month from this one deal, just from the signs in her softball team's yards. And it's been for over 2 years now. You get that? 20 to 25 grand a month, each of them, for over 2 years. Now, just about anybody in my world knows about them because they're awesome, and they'll all tell you about this. And this isn't even the only deal they have going. This is one of the first deals they put in place, and they have several other deals going. But just think about how cool that is. Going to your softball team, using signs, maintaining those signs, and making over 20 to 25 grand a month for years. Now, in case you're new or maybe you don't see how that can happen or how that can be done, I'll break that down. Like I said, I'll break that down in a second. But first, think about why somebody on her softball team would keep those signs up. Why would they do that? Well, imagine if you went to them and you said, "What's your favorite charity?" Okay, and how much did you give that charity last year? Now, most people don't give any money every year to their charity, but let's say somebody gave, $5,000 to their charity. And then you say, okay, well, I can donate twice that amount. I'll donate $10,000 to your favorite charity. So think about the next big dinner that they have. They'll get up and honor all their big donors. You can be one of them. And all you have to do is keep this sign in your yard, right? And they're friends, they're on your softball team. So you have a relationship with them. That's one way of keeping your signs up. There's about 19 other compliance moves that we have to keep signs up. But the point is, it's not that hard. I have students doing it every day. Signs are brilliant, and keeping them up is never a problem. But I want you to stop for a second and think about the larger application of this. First of all, do you think we've put all those steps down onto a checklist, right? You think it's to a point where anybody can execute this? You think they've applied the same softball team sign thing in many, many different ways? Absolutely, right? But before I get into any of that, first let me point out that although you've probably heard about putting out signs as a real estate investor, and if you haven't, you've at least seen them. And even if you haven't, just hearing about it makes it pretty clear. It's not like the phrase putting out signs gets lost in translation. But even though you're familiar with it, have you ever heard of it being done like this? I'll bet you haven't. I would bet that you've never heard of anybody doing it so artistically, so skillfully, so methodically. It's like John Rockefeller said, it's not about doing the uncommon things commonly well, it's about doing the common things uncommonly well. That's what we're all about. And that's what this is. You can go out and hire somebody to put out signs for you and try to pay them as little as possible, and maybe they'll do it, maybe they won't. But imagine having somebody who goes out and makes you 20 to 25 grand a month for the next 2 years. If you want that, then it requires a different level of person that you must be. Be what you seek, right? Or you can choose to be like everybody else, in which case none of this will happen. You can be a giant Puss in Boots and complain that nothing works in my area. Or you can say things like, I want systems and automation, and I want to exploit third world labor because I don't want to do anything. I want it done for me. I want it done for me. That's the attitude. It's the attitude. That's why so many people are broke. And I have to laugh when people say they want to get in business to have more free time, so I could spend more time with my friends and my family and traveling. Really? Traveling? That's the extent of your ambition? That's your big reason why? That's why you're doing this? Your reason why will determine how far you're willing to go. And when you have such a weak why, or such a series of weak whys, you won't be willing to go through very much. And think about that. Think about traveling and watching TV or whatever those ambitions are that most people have. If that's your goal, if your goals are so self-centered, then you should compare those goals, compare the result of those goals to what if all you did was get drunk and masturbate? Would anybody notice the difference? You see what I mean? If you aren't helping anybody or going out of your way to make a real difference in people's lives, then what's the point? So that I can do what I want to do? I'll sometimes hear people say, I want to do what I want to do. Well, jackass, what do you want to do? Unless it's compelling, first of all to you, let alone to others, it's not going to move you, it's not going to pull you, it's not going to push you. When people talk about having time to do stuff, the stuff that they want to do is so meaningless that it's not even motivating enough to them. It won't push them very far. It won't push them through very much. It won't push them very far. And if your only reason for getting into business is to be out of business, to be out of that business, to not be involved with it, then you should find something else to do. Something you're more willing to invest yourself in. Remember our soundbite, if you start a business you don't care about, you're going to have a business that you don't care about. And it's why so many people in real estate quit. And it's why all the stuff I go over, it applies to real estate as well as any other business you want. So do what you want. So many people in real estate quit as soon as the slightest obstacle comes up because you've got to be crazy enough to get through it. And they're not crazy. It's like Steve Jobs said, the single biggest secret to business is to be crazy, be insane, because any sane person will quit. So when people say things like, I want to get into business so I have more free time, are you serious? That's like saying, I want to have a baby so I have more free time. And let's be clear, almost nobody makes any money in real estate, and certainly not $10,000 to $30,000 a month, and then definitely not autonomously. We're talking about such a tiny fraction of people. Remember, you want to go through the SA class and go through the research, look up the facts, and you'll see it. You really look into social mobility and you'll see it for yourself. I mean it when I say that it almost pretty much never happens. So if you choose to be an LC about this, then it definitely won't happen for you. And shame on you for thinking that it should. If you choose to be like most people, you'll get what most people get. Now, if you're listening to what I'm saying about the levels of commitment, discipline, and that kind of obsessive work ethic, if you're hearing what I'm describing and you're thinking, wow, that sounds like a lot of work, then you are absolutely right. You are the reason why it's so easy to get rich in America. So you have a choice to make. You can go ahead and keep your head in the sand, keep mourning your forgotten dreams, let your laziness burn everything around you, let fear paralyze you. You can go ahead and take the ocean of opportunity that you're drowning in and turn it into a tundra of regret and unrealized potential. You can live that life of what they call quiet desperation and watch as your life passes you by, as your spouse grows to detest you. Watch as you wake up one day and your kids have turned gay, all because you're unwilling to do anything about it. You get what I mean? And I'm just kidding about the gay jokes. And remember, and I've said this before, I was 18 years old, and one of the first real estate agents that really helped me was a guy who was so over the top gay. He was, gayer than a unicorn tap dancing on a rainbow. He was out there, and he was so helpful and so amazing, and he didn't have to be. And even at the young age of 18, I realized how silly it was for me to have such a strong opinion about people that I never met or knew much about. And I actually changed a lot of minds of my friends and a lot of people that I knew. And that was a long time ago. So I'm just saying, I'm joking about the gays and don't mean to jab at them. I love you guys. Anyway, like I was saying, with the signs and the way that Darcy did them, it's beautiful, right? And the thing is, when you do things like that, it's easy to run circles around everybody else because most of them want to quit anyway. They just need an excuse. It's fun for you and work for them. So who's going to outlast who, right? That's what you've got to be about. Be the last person standing. Now, like I said, this has been policized and checklisted, and now she's working with softball teams, football teams, and soccer teams across America. And think about how many blue-collar areas, like the lower income areas, how much opportunity is there in places like that? Those places are, first of all, they're a gold mine for real estate deals, but think about how many people there have kids in those areas that want to be part of a football team or something, but they just don't have the money. The money for the fields, the uniforms, the traveling, all that stuff. You see the connection here? Think about when you go into those areas and you start getting a bunch of signs up, a bunch of business going, and you get to help the local kids out at the same time. What parent wouldn't put a sign in their yard for their child to play on a sports team? Every parent in the world. Any parent that wouldn't do that must have, tried to have an abortion and it didn't work and the kid came out anyway, and they've hated him ever since. They are terrible people. You're better off without them. So of course it's, like everybody will do it, yeah? And there have been plenty of students who've done this. This is one version of what we call a self-serve, like I said earlier. There's a lot of students that have done this, and this is what I was talking about earlier. One of my all-time favorite things that we do, this is it. When I said earlier about going out making 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 grand or whatever in 1 week and, in a couple of days, in a week, 10 days, 2 weeks or whatever, this is what I'm talking about. So now we're about to get into the details here, but I just want to let you know that this is what I was talking about making that fast cash. This is an unbelievably powerful way to make fast cash and to help people out at the same time. So let's say you're starting from zero. You have no experience. You have no idea what you're doing. And remember, whenever you're starting anything from zero, you can always do a self-serve. So imagine you have 15 or 20 hot locations for signs, right? Let's say you're working with a local football team or whatever, just like Darcy did. And you have 15 or 20 good, solid, well-researched locations for signs. So we're going to do two things. First, you put up the signs for sellers. So you put the I'll make a guaranteed offer on your home in the next 24 hours or a sign, something like that. Then you take the replies, you pick up the houses that come in from those replies. Then you turn around, use the same locations where the signs are, and you just change the signs for buyers. So now the signs say you can move in today, no qual. You see what I mean? We're going to move the inventory that you just got through the same vehicle. Because remember, a self-serve is when you use the same pocket of consumers for both sides of a transaction. In this case, the pocket of consumers consumers are the people that are calling from the signs. So first we find the sellers. Once we have, plenty of houses, then we move those houses through the same method. It's all from the same checklist, by the way, we're talking about with signs. You see what I mean? Now let me tell you about the Brittles, Steve and Carrie. Steve's dad got sick, so they went out of town to stay with him in the hospital, and he thought they'd only be there for a weekend, but things got a lot worse. In a few days, turned into several days, and then it was clear it was going to be weeks or even months, and that they were going to have to be there with his dad, and Steve did not want to leave his dad at the hospital. Now, he was a student at that time, and he was making a few things happen, but it still wasn't enough money, nearly enough to quit his job. He had kind of sporadic deals, but nothing predictable. And he still had this job hanging over his head, and he had to get back to the job. So here he is, wanting to stay with his dad, but he's got to go back out of town to go back to his job. And it was at that moment that he realized how handcuffed he was at his job, how much it was dragging him down. So he knew he had to put a model or put something in place quickly. So one day as he was looking out his dad's hospital window, he saw kids playing on a broken down playground across the street. They were playing a game of pickup football, and then it hit him. He asked the nurse how often the kids go out there, and she said they're out there every day. You see where this is going, right? Whenever you see a game of pickup football, for example, you should realize that you can provide a more organized way for these kids to give each other brain damage, right? That's exactly what they did. He put this exact model in place to help the local kids organize teams. And he had no idea about the market, the area, anything. He had no context, nothing. And he did the self-serve just like I described. He used nothing but signs in the yards. Think about it from the parents' point of view, or the people who are using the signs. What do they have to risk? Because you're going to give them a percentage of the money you make, but what do they have to risk? Nothing, right? So he got the signs up, and he did exactly what we talked about. First to find houses, then he used the same locations to move the houses that he just got. And he kept growing and growing and getting better with his research on the sign locations, got a broader reach, and he was running everything out of the hospital room and the lobby. He was taking calls, putting it together, going out, talking to people, coming right back to the hospital, and everything he was doing, he was using his phone, his smartphone, to track everything. You could do this with an iPhone or an Android or any smartphone, and you could track everything to get this going. You see how exciting this is, right? How easy this is to get going, how quickly you can get this going. The bottom line is that he stayed with his dad for about 60 days until they got out of the hospital. And in that 60 days, their net income, their net profit to them was over $37,000, just about $500 a day. And during that time, he also quit his job, by the way. But think about what he did, and think about the impact you can have. Not only can you make money, but you can help kids, you can rebuild communities, you can provide needed housing, you can boost local economies, you can be a godsend. You see what I'm saying? It's brilliant. Gotta love this stuff. And a lot of times people act like they have to have a whole bunch of stuff going on before they can do this. You don't. You can get out right now and make this happen. Like I said, you can go right now, starting from zero. So if you're serious about making shizzle happen, you can do this. A few days ago, Anna sent me a quote that I really liked. It said, "The amateur waits for inspiration, the pro does it with a headache." Do it with a headache. You can do this. Some of you may remember Jamie Chapman. Her brother was a soldier who was lost the use of his legs. She was a nurse. He was staying at home. He was getting really down on himself, getting really depressed, bordering on suicidal. One day she snaps. She says, "Enough is enough. You're not going to sit around and feel sorry for yourself. You're not going to be a bum. You're not going to turn into a total piece." She kind of, pokes his chest a little. And she says, "This is what we're doing. We're going to set this up right now." He said, "Let's do it." What did she do? She went to his local support group. She told all of them, "Listen, I don't know what's going to happen. Whatever money I make, whatever money he and I make together," she said, "Look, I'm going to get this going. Half the money I make, we're going to give back to the group." And it was just a small support group of people. It was just a small support group. And by the way, she was a nurse. She was working all the time. She didn't even have time to put out the signs. What did she do? She made a Skype video showing people how to make the signs, how to write the handwriting on the signs. She made a video with how to make the seller signs. Got them up in the yards of everyone, her own yard, first of all, Jamie's own yard, but then in the yards of everyone in her brother's support group. Then she made another Skype video a few days later telling him, "Okay, I got plenty of houses." Her brother was taking all the calls and returning all the calls while she was at work. He was picking up the houses, never left the house, by the way. Her brother never left the house. He picked up the houses. A few days later, she made another Skype video showing everyone how to make a buyer side, how to, change the headline, basically. Some of the people were just flipping the signs over. Think about how badass that is. She's like, "You know what? I don't even have time to go out and put signs in your yards. You're going to put signs in your own yards. And we're going to take the calls and we're going to split the money that we make." The bottom line, Jamie's brother was taking the calls. She arranged for the signs out. The bottom line, in 4 days, they made $10,000. 5 days, $15,000. 7 days, $20,000. Now, how exactly does that happen? How do you make that much money, I wonder, huh? I'm going to go over the numbers in a second just to show you how underperforming these guys were. As soon as, for example, Jamie and her brother got on top of it and really got their dialogue down, they did a lot better than that. We had another student, Barrett in the CA. Heavy B goes out. He says, "This is exactly what I'm going to do." This is why I said earlier, doing this like self-serve with signs, I just love this concept so much. It's a quick way to make a bunch of money. You get crazy, you go out there, man. You can just, you want it, just go and grab it, So he goes out. So Heavy B goes out. He starts putting out signs for sellers. And while he's putting them out, he's getting calls. He had the calls go right to his cell phone. He starts taking the calls. I think he got, 10, 15, maybe 12, 13 calls from sellers. So he's having these conversations. He picked up a few houses. These houses he was going to buy on lease option or do a master lease and then sublease the property out out or to a lease option and assign it to a buyer. So then he goes back to the exact same locations that he put his seller signs out because he thought, you know what, these areas are pulling calls, so let me go back. But as he went back, this is all in one afternoon, as he went back, he saw that his signs had been taken down. But he thought, you know, the signs stayed up long enough for me to get calls, so let me just try putting buyer signs up in the same locations that my seller signs just got torn down, right? This is all in one day. So he's picking up houses, and as he's talking to these sellers, he's finding buyers, like as he's on the phone, right? He's putting out the signs for the buyers as he's talking to the sellers. And I don't know, I think he picked up 2 or 3 houses at that time. The bottom line is that night he moved his first house, made over $6,000 on his first deal on his first day. That's what I'm talking about. You get what I'm saying? Now let's go over the numbers on just how profitable this can be and just how these numbers work. And Barrett was in California, by the way, where nothing works. So I don't know. Okay, let's go over these numbers now, just to give you an idea of where this comes from. So on a lease option, you generally want to make at least $3,000 to $5,000 down. That's the bare minimum of cash in hand. Now that doesn't include if you double dip and work with an investor, or if you take, let's say, any equity or part of the down payment and you create a note and then you sell that secondary note. So you can make a lot more money upfront with cash, 2 to 3 times as much. And then if you're willing to wait, 4, 5, 10 times as much. But let's just talk about cash right now, $3,000 to $5,000. And we're just talking about real estate, buyers and sellers, strictly for lease options. We're not even going to include any of the other models or any of the other ways of making money. We're just talking about lease options straight with sellers and buyers. So let's say that for a good seller sign gets you 5 to 10 seller calls a day. Let's say just 5 calls a day, 5 calls from sellers a day. In 1 week, that's 35, but let's be even more conservative and say it's just 30 calls a week. Well, if you just have 10 signs like that, that's over 300 calls in a week. 300 calls a week, even if it's 3 calls a day, just 3 calls a day, not 5 calls, 3 calls a day, that's still over 180 calls a week. Now let's just say it's only 1 call a day, which is never a good sign, by the way, but even at 1 call a day, that's 7 calls a week times 10 signs, that's 60 to 70 calls a week from sellers. You see what I'm saying? Even if you just do deals with, let's say, 10% of those people, 1 out of 10 of those people that are calling you, of the sellers calling you saying they want to sell their house, even if you work with just 10% of them, that's 6 deals, let's say. And if we go with an average of $5,000, that's $30,000 a week, $30,000 a week. Now, even if you do deals with just 5% of those people, if you only make money with 1 out of 20 sellers who calls, that's still $15,000 a week. Even if you just make $3,000 on each deal, that's still $9,000 a week. And by the way, getting 1 call a day is terrible. That's not a sign that you want to keep up. You need to improve that. But even if you screw everything up, getting 1 call, only doing 5%, and still only making $3,000, that's still $9,000 a week. $9,000 a week. Now those numbers are terrible, right? So let's look at some more realistic numbers. Let's say you got 3 calls a day, which even this is terrible. 3 calls a day is not a good sign. And let's say it's just 10 signs. We're not even doing 15, 20, 100. We're just doing 10, just 10 signs. That's still over 150 calls a week. And if you close, let's say 10% of those deals and you made $5,000, that's over $75,000. Even at $3,000, that's still $45,000. And you don't have to wait a week, by the way. People have done it faster. Like I said, $6,000 in a day, and it's crazy. But that's not normal. Most people aren't that hungry. They aren't that nuts. I want to make that clear. You got to be crazy. But the thing is, remember, this is all checklisted, right? Remember, first we get the locations, then we do the research to find better locations within those areas. Maybe it's a neighbor's yard or something like that. And then we just calibrate and we compare the type of calls we're getting, the number of calls we're getting, and the transactions that we're doing. Do we need more sellers? Do we need more buyers? And how many are needed for a transaction? And that's it. That's all you're doing. And when we were talking about Jamie, for example, they had over 80 sellers. They were swamped in seller calls. Then when they switched those signs for buyers, they had over 300 buyers. What would that do to your business? And then you're just moving the knobs and levers. That's it. You just repeat, iteration after iteration after iteration. The algorithm is always simple. It's the iterations that creates the masterpiece. And once this is in place, you're basically in your command center just, calibrating, right? Earlier when we were talking about Steve, he actually worked with one of his dad's nurses and trained her to run the entire model. And now he has 1 single conference call with her once a week. That's all the time he puts into the model. Imagine having 1 call once a week and making $500 to $1,000 a day from 1 model and just improving that every week, week after week after week. And when I talk about models, remember that whenever we have these checklists and policies and whenever they get to 10 to 30 grand a month consistently, we break it off into a model. A model is defined basically by a series of behaviors that predictably lead somebody to make 10 to 30 grand a month. It's silly, for example, in real estate to be limited to being a foreclosure investor or a wholesaler. The problem isn't just the limited range of income, it's the limited range of thought. The point of a model is that you set it up, it's like this oil well, it makes you 10 to 30 grand a month, you get it subtractive and autonomous, and then you move on and you build your teams. Think about Darcy, for example, the way she worked with her team, all the badassery that she illustrated, that she exemplified with the way she did the signs. Are you going to get that level of intensity by hiring some bum and paying him nothing to put out your signs? I've heard people in real estate say things like, I paid somebody to do signs and they just threw them away. Or I hired somebody to make calls or send out letters and they didn't do shit. It's your fault. Or they'll be like, it's so hard to find good help. The question is, do you deserve good help? Are you good help to them? It's not hard to find good help. It's never the case. It's never hard to find good help. That is never the case. The real question is, how worthy are you of finding good help? Imagine if an artist joined your team. Can you give me a single reason why they would stay? Think about the average, the average I buy homes guy. Would an artist stay with them, or would they feel neglected? Are they going to make a lot of money? Are they going to be pushed or challenged in any compelling way? Are they doing anything other? Is there a vision other than the guy doesn't want to do anything? He wants to have free time to spend with his friends and family. You get what I'm saying? The ambitions you have are the ambitions your team will have. They are the ambitions of your company. You set the compass for everybody. Are they going to be helping anybody in a deep way? I want you to remember this. When it comes to building your team, please remember this. People will always do more because of who they are than they will because of what you pay them. That's always the case. So you should look forward to making the people around you rich. Be grateful to pay them more and more and more. When you're an artist, you'll attract the artists. Take, for example, earlier when I mentioned the sending of handwritten letters to people on Zillow. Plenty of students have done that. And it's really hard to make less than 5 to 10 grand a month if you do that consistently and you take it seriously. Now, before any of you get excited, remember it won't work in your area, but if it did, it would be easy money. Now, a while back, Zach had a gal he was working with, and she was sending out the letters, and she was doing this model that we talked about. And every week he did a conference call with her, and the agent who was handling the deals was on the calls as well. And this was entirely Zach's deal, and he was making, I don't know, like 15 to 20 grand a month, and they were improving it, getting better and better. But I got on one of the calls with him because he was telling me how great his team was and how great this young lady was at coming up with these ideas and how seriously they took their roles. So I was on the call, and I don't mean to always put the role of the receptionist like a woman, but I don't want to be sexist about that. I'm just saying it does happen to be in these two examples that we're talking about. The gal was a gal answering the phones. So I was on the call, and this girl sent out the letters, was tracking everything. She was a nut about it. She was doing everything with the letters and the quality of calls and how to get more letters open and how to get them read. And she was taking it really seriously, being really artistic with it, making lots of money. It was really cool. And the thing about brilliant ideas is that they're almost always disguised as terrible ideas, right? Once you get them, you can keep them by improving them. Once you get them, you want to keep using them and improving them. And the artist will always get really competitive. And they'll want to bring an equally or more effective idea. They'll want to be better and better. They'll want to bring their brilliance. And what happens is you create a situation where people are eager. They're looking forward to. They're fighting to bring a better and better version of themselves to you. So everywhere you go, people are bringing an improved version of themselves. How exciting is that? You can create that within your team. So for example, with this, I mentioned this earlier about what her idea. This idea was just hilarious. It still cracks me up. One thing that we do with the letters, that whenever we send them, is that we take the letter out and we wrinkle it up into a ball. And we do that a few times. And then we do the same thing with the envelope. And sometimes we'll put tire tracks or take a wet tea bag and smear it all over the letter and the envelope. So by the time it gets to the destination, it looks like it's been through hell. And sometimes we'll put like a giant hickey, a big, a woman's lips on the front, and a little note that says call me, or, we do, little stuff like that to try to get these, to try to get a higher response rate. So we try to get more and more creative on how to get these things opened. And once something pulls, then we keep using on it and we keep building on it to try to improve it. Because you get a tiny change in response, it could mean the difference between 50 grand a month and 100 grand a month. So I was on this call with Zach's team, and this gal had an idea of using stick figures. So she would draw stick figures on the envelope. So she started drawing some on the front of the envelopes, and it was working really well. And then I don't know how this came up, but then she had an idea to take that. We were trying to improve that idea to get a better response rate. And so she came up with an idea that is just awesome. So remember, her goal is to make sure that more letters get read and that we get more calls, that more deals happen, because she has a vested interest in this because of the way that we build our teams. So she came up with the idea after she'd been using the stick figures for a while. She said, why don't we, I don't know how this came up, but she said, how about I draw the stick figures on the envelope? I'll draw stick figures. She said, how about I draw on the envelope? I'll draw stick figures having sex. Having sex. It still cracks me up. It's just nuts, to draw them on the envelope. And at first, everybody's like, well, maybe that's too much. Maybe that's too graphic or, too illegal or something. But the overall thought was, that's awesome. Let's do it. And so she tested it. And a lot of times when we have a long ball like this, we'll go to a segment of people that we've been mailing to for a while and have not replied to anything. So you'll always get, whenever you mail a lot, you'll always get these like black holes, this dead list of people that don't respond to anything. And that's the list we went to. We sent this, these envelopes with stick figures, doing it right on the front. And we sent this to this black hole list that didn't respond to anything. And what happened? We got 2 calls from people who had ignored us up to that point. And one of them specifically mentioned the stick figures when they called. And another ended up turning into a deal that made $17,000 in a few days. I don't know, it was like less than a week. It was like $6,000 to $7,000 down, and the rest rest of it, the 10 or 11,000, was on the back end. It was a lease option deal, so there's money up front, and the rest of it, the equity, was later on. So that 17 grand wasn't all up front. But think about this. You may not be excited about sending out, fornicating stick figures, but if you knew that you'd make 17 grand in the next week, how would you feel about it then? That's what I'm talking about, right? And this is from a group of people that we'd written off. And that's really a powerful lesson. You're a single test away, no matter where you're at, you're a single test away from $17,000 in the next few days. But even that's not really my overall point of why I'm bringing her up. What I'm saying here is, just like earlier, when I talked about signs and how artistically they can be done, think about this. Having someone send out letters. They can do it half-assed or unemotionally, right? But have you ever heard of anyone who does it the way she was doing it, who takes it that seriously, with that level of focus, attention, and passion? She sits around with her friends and talks about ways to send mail, better ways to do it. Don't you want that? Don't you want people on your team who spend their free time with their friends brainstorming better ways to make you more money? You see the difference? These aren't grunts or VAs or virtual assistants. They're part of something much bigger. And when brilliance is expected, it is delivered. That's the power, not just of a checklist, but of the execution. And I can go over so many more examples, but we are way past our time here. But very quickly, I'll go over one more that I promise, just because these guys are so nuts and you guys always love when I talk about them. So this is, of course, Sergeant Chris. Can you remember his crazy friend that more recently became a student? George Colonel Arndt. Now these guys are out there, and I mean really out there. For those of you that thought Chris was a nut, George makes him look normal. So this is how he made over 18 grand a month selling guns. Now, I'm always giving these guys a hard time because they are those, in America we have these like conservative and liberal groups, like political groups. These guys are extreme right-wing guys. They are out there. I mean, right-wing as in they think Rush Limbaugh is too liberal, and they're real gun nuts. They're like they're the people who are fighting to get guns allowed in schools and libraries, which makes sense after all, because what's the point of reading if I can't read to my gun, right? I love these guys. I'm always ribbing them. They're great guys. They just crack me up. George is a guy who will watch a movie like Frozen or Toy Story or even, like Finding Nemo, and he will see it as a direct attack on his Second Amendment rights. Everything is an attack on his Second Amendment rights. That's the right to bear arms, if you don't know. So he is a riot. In America we had the Civil War where the South fought the North, and there are some people who want, like a rerun of the Civil War. They want to do it again, and they want, hopefully, the South to win so those southern states can secede from the Union and not be part of America anymore. There are people who really want this to happen today, and George is one of those guys. He's just such a funny guy. I have such a great guy. And I'm picking on him a little too much here, but I love him. I love these guys. They're hilarious. They're great guys. And with George, let me put it this way. I'll sum it up this way. Here's George in a nutshell. If there is another Civil War in America, if there's a revolution like that in America right now, I guarantee you that he started it. I'm sure of it. All right. Okay, I pick on him with love. I do it with love. He's a great guy. He's a great student. He goes through everything, by the way. He executes, and he's hungry, and he's awesome. He's brilliant, and I promised I'd go over his stuff. So basically, he spent a lot of time at gun shows, big surprise. And then he talked with a couple of successful dealers. He came up with a simple checklist, basic things like holding shooting contests, doing private showings for VIP clients, share self-defense stories once a week, things like that, basic stuff. And then he helped the local store put those things in place. And then he helped another, and basically this simple checklist would increase the value, and he got paid on the increase in business. And I'm not, actually, there's a lot more to it. I'm not doing it justice right now. I'll go more into his stuff later, and some of you will be able to hear the interview that I do with him later. But the bottom line is that he started working with different companies, and actually has a company now that does nothing but helps other companies, sell more firepower. And he's doing right now 18 grand a month from selling guns without ever selling a gun himself or even seeing a gun himself, which is heartbreaking for him, I know, but it's an autonomous model, and it works, and it runs on its own. It's pretty cool. My goodness, we're way past our time. I'm not doing that his example justice. We'll talk more about that later. Okay, so we got to stop. There's one more that I did promise we'd talk about. That's with Val, a relatively new student. So real quickly, here's another example that'll make this more clear. The power of checklisting things and making sure that they're followed. So she's, like I said, a relatively new student. I don't work with that many students. She was really ambitious, really hungry, and we all knew from the get-go that she was going to do great. So she was working at a hardware store ever since her divorce because, a lot of times, and this happens with a lot of people, they get divorced, and so usually it's the woman, but it's not, more and more it's the man. One spouse went to school, or it's been a while since they went to school, and they don't have as relevant of an education or recent experience to warrant a good paying job based on the standard way that a resume is, evaluated. So they end up picking up some small work, like working at a hardware store. She was a stock girl. She, stocked inventory, and she answered phones and did odd jobs around the store, but she was hungry, man. So she took the same checklist thing we just talked about. We covered this earlier with the agents. This one right here, signs, showings, closings. Once she trained her agent to do it correctly, after that, all she'd have to do is call sellers. And once she had a house that she wanted to use, she could have them pick up the ball right where she left it off. So as soon as she talked to a seller once, the agent took over and did everything else. So she started doing this on her lunch break. She'd call sellers and for rent ads at out of the newspaper. This is a whole nother model that we invented a long time ago. So she called him right out of her paper, right out of ads, totally free. And if she agreed to pick up the house and do a lease option with it, once she was done with that conversation, her agent's team would take everything over. They followed up, they got the paperwork done, they got the signs, they got the showings, the closings, what we talked about earlier. All she did was call sellers and nothing else. And once that was going smoothly, then she built her team. She hired somebody to make those calls. A transaction tech. Remember, these are called transaction techs. You want to build your team with TOTS, transaction techs, terminators, and then eventually SAs. For more on that, you want to go to webuildempires.com, scroll to the bottom and watch the SA class. But the good students know what a transaction tech is. So she hired somebody to make those calls, and then that person made the calls. That made her totally subtracted from the entire situation. You see how this works, right? The calls are made, and as soon as the house is picked up, it's handed off immediately right to the agent. And when you build your team correctly, you pay nothing out of pocket. It all comes from money that they make you. There is zero out-of-pocket cost to build your team this way. And more importantly, the entire model doesn't cost a penny. None of this costs any money out of pocket. You can put this all in place without spending a penny, and you could start today. It becomes really exciting when you can sit down, pick up the phone, and you know for every time that you say yes, every house that you pick up, you know that immediately the machine's going to be put in place. And even if you move 1 out of 2 deals over the next 3 to 5 days, and you're making $3,000, you could pick up the phone and make 12 to 15 grand in one sitting. It may just take a few days or a week or two for that money to come in. And then when you replace yourself, right, now you've got a business. And the bottom line is that right now, in her first 12 weeks, she's been making $4,000 a week. That's $4,000 a week, every week. And we should be at about 5 to 10 grand a week in the next few weeks. And keep in mind that all she's doing right now is just a conference call once or twice a week with her team. That's it, because it was built correctly with subtraction in place. You see what I'm saying? Okay, like I said, we're way past our time. We got to get this going. We gotta end this. Bottom line is you just don't make sure that you don't write off the power of getting, of checklisting and putting these things in place, right? It's really important. And I really hope this helps make that more clear. We're way past our time right now. I just want to make sure that you take this seriously. Don't write off the power of how simple, this is a simple concept, but it's powerful. Put this in place, y'all. It's important. It can make a big difference. We just went over all sorts of examples on how to use checklists to start a business, grow a business, start getting paid over and over again. All that other stuff that we talked about, a whole bunch of stuff. But we're way past our time, so we're going to wrap this up. We're going to come back next time. Finally, remember this. A good friend of ours and a student sent this to me, and I thought it was pretty cool. I don't know who said it. It's like one of those Facebook things that was going around like YOLO or yes we can, but this one's pretty cool. Here it is. Obsessed is how people who lack passion describe those who don't. I love it. Thought it was pretty cool. As always, remember, if and when applications being accepted, go to webuildempires.com, scroll all the way to the bottom. You can watch the essay class, and if applications are being accepted, you can apply. Also, make sure if you don't get emails directly from me whenever we send them out, which sometimes we go underground for a long time, but if we're out about, you want to go to captainbad.com and you can get emails directly from me. Okay, guys, we got to wrap up. I want to say thank you so much for all the support, all the feedback, all the energy, love, gratitude. I really appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. I really do. It means the world to me and all of us. Thank you so much. And when it comes to getting this stuff done, man, you can do this. If you're out there thinking, oh, I can't do this, you can do this. It's not that hard. You know what I mean? Get out there and get it. You want it, man. It's out there. No one's stopping you. Get out there and make it happen. You can do it. You can do it. Yes, you can. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Oh, man. George is going to love that. Okay, guys, thank you so much. We'll talk soon. Until next time, take care. God bless.